Great to... Well, I think I'll start out. How many people are here mainly for autism? Raise your hand. All right, what about animals? Okay, we got more animal people. All right. So then I kind of know how to do my talk tonight. I often get asked how autism helped me with animals. I am an extreme visual thinker. Everything I think about is a picture. I don't think in words. When you want to understand animals, you got to realize it's a sensory-based world. This is a picture a young man sent to me when he was a teenager, how he thinks in pictures. And the HBO movie shows very clearly how I think in pictures. See, the first thing you got to do if you want to understand animals is you got to get away from words. What is it hearing? Animals are very sensitive to the tone of voice, the tone of language. That's probably related to music. You know, think about what the dog's smelling when he checks out the local tree. It's like going to the coffee shop. There's a lot of gossip there. And when I was young, I thought everybody thought the same way I did. So when I first started working with cattle, I got out and I looked at what they were seeing. And I noticed that the cattle would stop at a hose on the ground, a shadow, a coat on a fence, sort of things that look like it shouldn't be there. And I didn't realize why other people didn't see this. And in some of the work that I did in design work, I think somebody else did something stupid, and I finally realized it wasn't stupidity. They simply weren't seeing the things that I see. See, visual thinkers will see solutions to a problem. Like I might talk to somebody about a disability, and then I see the perfect job for that person. I see it as a picture. It's not in words. And I talked about this earlier about looking at what cattle were looking at. Maybe if they're looking straight into the sun, they're not going to, move through this handling facility very well. Something as simple as orientation to the sun. What I want to try to teach you is how to be a better observer, to observe. And this is eclipse shadows on the sidewalk at our library at CSU. I didn't know eclipses made weird shadows like this through the trees. I noticed this. The other students didn't. So I want to try to get you into observing. What's your animal doing? What is he looking at? What is he attending to? What's his body posture? Looking at a whole lot of details. So I get down in the chute and I see that the cattle are balking at the vehicles parked along the fence. And cars are really bad because they get a lot of reflections on them. But you got to get right down at the right height to see those reflections. Chains hanging down in chutes. Why after 44 years I still got to keep talking about this? Because people are not removing them. And guess what? I went to one of the plants I go to all the time last year, and they had the hose right across the main drive alley. I still have to go back and correct the same problems. And I had a really cool job in Ireland. We get out through customs and everything at the Dublin airport. We go out and we rent this really big, cool, hairy black helicopter. We land on the lawn of this beef plant, and the cattle wouldn't go in the chute. And the problem was there was holes in the wall, and they could see motion. 6 pieces of duct tape later, it was fixed, and we got in the helicopter and flew away. The thing is that they didn't see it. That was 2 years ago. That was relatively recent. This particular facility didn't work very well because as the cattle came up this chute, they could see the trucks loading. You got to watch them. Where do they stop? What are they looking at? What's your animal attending to? This is like the dark movie theater. They don't want to go in there. Sunny day, they won't go in. At night, you got to light it right up with lights, and they'll go right in just fine. Lighting makes a big difference, a really big difference. Maybe get some light coming through the walls with some translucent panels so they can see light through that building. They don't like to go into the dark. I get asked all the time, are cattle afraid of getting slaughtered? They're more afraid of the dark. You put a light on the entrance of a chute, they go in. You could have a paper towel hanging out of the holder, and that's scaring them. Get rid of the paper towels, then they go in. Now, animals sometimes get scared of a lot of things, and sometimes your horse might get scared of something and you don't know why. Now think about it. If you train the horse to tolerate a blue and white umbrella, that doesn't transfer to the tarp. Umbrellas and tarps look totally different. Animal thinking is specific. I went and visited a Mustang training program at a prison, and the horses were really afraid of the guards. And one of the reasons for that is the guards were dressed Western. And during the roundups, they'd had bad experiences with people dressed Western. The prisoners definitely were not dressed Western, and they were the good guys. And the guards didn't like it when I said that they were the bad guys. But they just, cowboy hats, things like that, that was, associated with getting chased around on the ground. I knew a horse that was terrified of black cowboy hats. He'd been abused by a person wearing a black cowboy hat. White hats were fine, black hats were bad. Animal thinking is specific because it's not word-based, it's sensory. What is it seeing, hearing, smelling? Okay, how can humans relate to smell? I remember reading an article about a wine steward, and he could identify 2,000 different wines. Maybe that's as close as a person can get to a dog smelling. I mean, a dog can smell detail that we can't smell. Now, for all animals, also for people with autism, sudden new experiences are scary. Surprises scare. So let's do things to make it less of a surprise. Going to go to a new school? Let's at least visit the website. Preferably visit the school. Reduce the surprise factor. I go to the airport all the time. They better know about TSA, may have to touch you. Let's show that on the web page. Maybe practice it. So it's not a surprise. That's the thing you got to be careful about. Animals don't like sudden surprises. You can have some cattle that are perfectly trained, they're really good low-stress stockmanship, but they're going to show you their genetics off, their flighty genetics, when a hot air balloon lands on the ranch, and then they scatter, because that was sudden surprise. I put a clipboard out in the middle of the pen, they all come up and sniff it. And when the wind flaps the paper, they run back. And they'll oscillate back and forth between approach and avoid. I call it curiously afraid. And there's actually been research where they have found these systems in the brain that can oscillate back and forth between fear and approach. There's a switch in the brain. And one of the ways to get over being afraid of something is to make it interesting. When I was in my 20s, I was terrified of airplanes. I was in a very scary emergency landing. I had to make them interesting. One of the ways to get over being afraid of something is make it interesting. Also, I used to be afraid of public speaking. And I panicked, and I walked out of my first graduate school talk, and then I learned have really good slides. And then if you panic, you can read your slides. I mean, I know that's horrible, public speaking, but you can do that. Well, when brain scanning equipment became available to scan visual thinking circuits, of course I had to go try it out. They're all the latest experimental scanners. I go try them out. This is 10 years old. And the thing that's kind of disgusting is that scanner's sitting there in the hospital. It's not being used. I think that's kind of disgusting. The other thing that we got to do in autism is build on the person's strengths. Take the thing he's good at, build on it. There's another visual thinking circuit. Now, this is trashed out working memory. Can't do algebra. Working memory is a problem. I do not handle long strings of verbal information well. Any task that involves a sequence, I need a checklist of the steps. Just simple keywords checklist. And then the whole issue of driving comes up. You need to get the operation of the car into motor memory before you touch traffic. I was very lucky on my aunt's ranch that the mailbox was 3 miles away on a dirt road. That was 36 miles of driving a week, 200 by the end of the summer before I touched traffic. That's the way to do it. Big parking lots, back roads. This is a really important slide. I'm a photorealistic visual thinker, and there's scientific research now that shows that there's two kinds of visualizers. There's the visualizers that think in photos, and there's the visualizers that think in patterns, the more mathematical thinkers, your programmers. And then you got your verbal guys, they love history. Then you got auditory thinkers, a lot of those are dyslexic. And I'm seeing too many kids getting held out back, the visual thinkers getting held back because they can't do algebra. You don't need algebra for skilled trade. You become a plumber, an electrician, a truck mechanic, a welder who can read blueprints. You got a job for the rest of your life. You're not going to get replaced by computers. I wouldn't bother studying oncology or radiology because the computers are going to replace that. That's the easy AI. That's the simple AI. Medical diagnosis, that's the easy stuff. They're going to do that first, along with some simple lawyer stuff and simple accounting stuff. Now here's the horse that was terrified of black hats. Now when I put the black hat on the ground, it was less scary. But then as I moved the hat closer and closer and closer to my head, it got more and more scary. You were getting a match. You see, it's a visual picture. Animal thinking is specific. Another problem you can get with the horses is certain types of bits can be associated with bad things. There's some really awful twisted wire bits that are jointed, like a snaffle. Well, if a horse has been abused with that type of bit, every snaffle will be bad. Every jointed bit's in the bad category. That one's an easy fix. Use solid one-piece Western bits. That will fix that horse. Because in that situation, I could remove the horrible thing. Another thing that might help some of these horses that have been abused is clicker training. And then the horse's brain gets so tuned in to trying to get the click, then he's not afraid. And you can read about that in my book, Animals Make Us Human. Calm animal, way much easier to handle. An animal gets all excited because he gets scared. Bring the cattle in, they're all excited. Give them half an hour to calm down, then handle them. It's very important, to reduce fear. That's something that's being recognized in veterinary practice. Let's make puppies' first experience at the vet clinic a good first experience. Bring them in, do a little treat. Now we're going to get worried about, we want to get the vaccines in before they get sick. So you can bring them back the next day or that afternoon to get the shot. But let's make sure that that first experience is a good first experience. A lot of dogs are getting really stressed out and they're turning gray. I've got a great colleague named Camille King. She is a wonderful researcher and a dog trainer. And she noticed in her dog training practice that a lot of young dogs were turning gray. So I helped her make a gray scale for judging gray on dog snouts. And what she found is dogs that have a hard time when they're home alone and dogs that are real impulsive were turning gray prematurely by age 4. The other thing we got to be doing with pets is we got to get them acclimated to their carrier. I did a project on dogs in the baggage hold of airplanes. You know what I found the biggest problem was? Fear. Trying to bust out of the crate, die, getting injured. You got to get them acclimated to the crate. That's the single most important thing you can do if a dog has to go in a baggage hold. He needs to be in love with his crate. Now, the way my mind works is my mind categorizes. So I had this big, huge binder full of records. Some of it's public data, some of it wasn't, on bad things in dogs in the cargo hold. And I started looking at some of these records. I'm going, what a cardiac arrest here. That's on the published website. And then on the other records, I'm finding bloody paws and bloody mouths. What causes that busting out of the crate? That's fear. Nobody else noticed that. They were more concerned about whether the airport had nice kennels. Yes, that's important, but probably not as important as the fear factor. Dying of fright. Can you imagine getting put in a black hole that's super noisy and you weren't used to your crate? That'd be super scary. Now, fear is the main emotion in autism. It's also the main emotion in animals. Fear. Lots of times react badly because of fear. Now, some animals are less fearful. That's sometimes called a bold personality. It's the same thing, low fear. Put them in the animal shelter, they're less likely to get sick. They don't get as scared. They don't get as stressed out. And animals do have emotions. Prozac works on dogs. Okay, let's just look at the facts. The emotional systems work the same way. I saw a show last night on the social lives of hyenas. It's very obvious that they had emotions. And they got the same neurotransmitters. Now, this is the Jack Penskep core emotional systems. People have this, animals have it. You got fear, motivates you to get away from predators. Then you got anger. Then you've got separation distress. That's a separate system from fear. For example, lots of times animals won't show their pain. Like sheep, for example, if you separate the lamb from the mom, there's a lot of vocalization going on. But sheep can have very serious injuries and not show it behaviorally because they're a very defenseless prey species animal, so they cover up the fact that they're hurt. And then seek, that's the urge to explore. Okay, there's some cattle that are going to run up the hills and really go out and climb up those hills. There are genetic differences. Other cattle, they're lazy. So that's it. Imagine each one of these traits on a music mixing board, and it's set by both inheritance and some experience things. Then you have sex. Then you've got mother-young nurturing, licking the calf and taking care of it. And then you've got play. And you can have high or low fear cows. And fear and aggression are separate traits. There was an interesting experiment done at New Mexico State University. Some cattle were laid back and laid around the waterers, and other cattle would get out and graze. They called them a go-getter or laid back. And it was genetic. You see anything wrong with that dog? It's in the brace position on that table. Let's start out giving the puppy a non-slip floor. I do a lot of talks to veterinarians, and I say, well, have the owner, when they get a puppy, buy a bath mat with a rubber mat backing. Get the puppy really used to it, maybe put it in his crate, make it a really nice thing, and then you bring that in and put the puppy on it on that table, and then you take it home and the vet doesn't have to clean it. So the vet's got no excuse for not doing it. But you look at the pictures online of cute dogs at the vet clinic, and you see this brace position. That's not very fun for the dog. And this is the cool stuff. Gregory Burns has MRI experiments on dogs. And they train dogs to lay still in the MRI machine. It's really funny. Look up the videos. They're really cute. And they train them to put their chin on a chin rest, and they're there wagging their tail, and they lay still for 15 minutes in there. And guess what they find out? Their emotions are the same as ours. That's what Gregory Burns found out. Another thing he found out is if you want to train a dog, the best thing to train them with is olfactory or visual stimuli rather than words. They can learn words, but words not their natural thing. And do animals feel pain? Yes. And ranchers will sometimes say to me, well, we castrated those calves and they went right up and they drank out of the waters and they grazed. That's because they're a prey species animal. They cover up the fact that they hurt. The only way to see the pain behavior is to spy on them at night with video cameras. Then you'll see it. You got to spy on them and they don't know anybody's looking. As soon as they know somebody's there, they cover it up. One time I hid in a scale house at a feed yard, and I could see the cattle come out of the squeeze chute, and they had this rubber band thing put on them to castrate them. And some of the animals would do a little stomp, but there was one bull that laid around and moaned. And when I came out of that scale house, he jumped up and acted normal. That's the prey species animal covering up that they hurt. Yes, animals will self-medicate for pain. Mammals and birds will both do it. Yes, it does hurt. Now, the thing that's different about the bull is he doesn't know what he's lost. That's the person would understand that, the bull doesn't. So that's something that is different between us and the animals. They don't know what it is they took off. Okay. Some other research that one of my students did was looking at animals in the animal shelter. What do they need? You got dogs in the animal shelter? They need a volunteer to come in every day for 45 minutes and give that dog a good time. And then the cortisol levels will be lower. Dogs need people. We have bred dogs to be super social. Does thunder shirts actually work? The idea for the thunder shirt originally came from my squeezing machine. So Camille, really great scientist, one of these independent, really hardworking people, she did an experiment. Our dog was left alone in a kennel, and it had a thunder shirt on tight the way it's supposed to, or one like 5 sizes too big so we controlled for clothing, and then put a heart rate monitor and a video camera and left it there. And the thunder shirt reduced the behavior of always looking at the door, and it reduced the heart rate. It seemed to work better on some of the separation stress than on the thunder. Though some people have found the pressure helps on the thunder too. And there's my squeezing machine, and that's where the idea for the thunder shirt came from. And you can read about that in some of my books. Pressure is calming. You can see where I got the idea from. Cattle squeeze chute, that's where I got the idea from. There's a not very flattering rear view picture right there. Okay, now a brain can be more social, or a brain can be more thinking. And here's an interesting paper. Solitary mammals is a model for autism. Okay, let's take the big cats. Lions are more social than panthers or leopards. There's crossover with autism. Are panthers defective? No, they're not. You see, that's just normal variation. There's another fantastic paper called Genomic Trade-offs. Autism and schizophrenia, the steep price for a human brain. The same genes that make the brain big cause autism and schizophrenia. So a certain amount of this is just on the milder end, it's just normal variation. See, it's a huge spectrum. You see, people get too locked into the words. I'm saying specific examples, different kinds of people, all along the spectrum, different kinds of animals. And wolves, they're more thinking and less social emotional, and they watch another wolf open up a box that's got some food, they'll just watch and do it. But the domestic dog's so busy asking us for help, he doesn't pay enough attention to figure out how to open up the box. We've bred them to be super social. And here's the papers on the autism and the epilepsy. It's called Genomic Trade-offs, or Autism and Schizophrenia, the steep price for a human brain. This is a brand new paper here, 2018. Now, the reason I want to show you this slide is when you force animals to do stuff, you get a lot more stress. Rough handling, force it. Net deer, maybe you held them down for only 5 minutes, but it's super stressful. When animals voluntarily cooperate with any kind of handling thing, then you don't get the fear stress. When you train them to cooperate. And here's antelope that we trained at the Denver Zoo, and everybody thought we were crazy and that we wouldn't be able to do this. It took 10 days to train this antelope to tolerate a sliding door going up and down. So the first day we moved it about that far, it went shh, and it orients. That's all we did that day. You've all seen that deer orient, and when he orients like that, the brain's making a decision. Do I keep watching, or do I freak out and have a big fear response? The brain makes a decision. There's a switch in there. And it took 10 days to train them to tolerate the sliding door going up. And we trained the untrainable animal. Now everybody's doing it. But you have to go through this whole very careful habituation before we even started training them to tolerate the shots and being handled. Livestock, you train them to go through the chutes. You get pigs used to people walking through them. They're going to be easier to handle. And the pigs differentiate between a person in their pen walking through them and a person in the alley. You've actually got to get in the pens with them and walk through them. Make sure an animal's first experience with a new person, a new place, such as the veterinary clinic, and a new piece of equipment, such as a horse trailer, is a good first experience. If a first experience is something new is really atrocious, they have a hard time getting over it. Think about it out in the wild. If you went around this one side of the hill and there was a lion back there, first time you went back there, you're probably not going to go back there again. Horses will oftentimes be less fearful of something new if they're with a familiar person that can help them to be less scared. Dog on the leash, I protect. Off the leash, I can play. Animals make categories. When I'm in the truck, I protect it. When I'm outside the truck, I play with people. That's an example of categories. And with service dogs, we need to be have very clear vest on work behavior. No, we don't roll around on our back with the vest on. You've got to have clear work behavior. And there's been some people, there's been a lot of controversy about service dogs. You also got talking with the airlines about dogs in the cabin. And for the most part, they've been a complete non-issue. They've been just fine. And service dogs are allowed in the cabin. Okay, emotional support dogs, they have to have a bit more documentation. But people have got to stop doing stupid things. Like bringing a dog on a plane. You can look up Delta dog bite, and this is not funny, it's really serious. and an emotional support dog ate off the face of a passenger in the window seat of a plane. That's really serious. And then there's the stupid stuff where your dog has diarrhea in first class, but you don't tell anybody and you don't clean it up. And you can look up Delta Airlines dog poop. And this one's funny. Oh, this businessman gets on the plane, and on Delta Airlines, the phone chargers are down on the chair leg. And he reaches down to plug in his phone, and his charger's in it. His shoe is in it. His pant leg is in it. And he's very, very upset at this point. And he goes up to the front of the plane, and the flight attendant gives him a little bottle of Bombay Sapphire Gin to wash off the dog poop. And then he takes, and the plane had just been redecorated. Really nice, really pretty, brand new interior. So he takes the loafer with the poo-poo on it and photographs it in the restroom and puts it up online. It made the national news. But this hurts it for everybody else, taking their dog on a plane. Clean it up, or at least tell them. And the other bad thing is, it resulted in the plane being taken out of service. That's not funny. That's a canceled flight. That's a ton of money. I've done a lot of work with big corporations, and I can see their side of it. It's like not okay. And I'm fine with dogs in the cabin. But let's be responsible. And those are two things that are pretty bad. Okay. Now, the way my mind works is I'm a bottom-up thinker. And this little boy sent me a picture to show how he's putting dogs and cats in categories in his brain. Information is put into categories, specific examples in categories. So you want to learn something like up or down, I've got to learn maybe 5 different examples of up. I went up the stairs. I walked up a hill. I put a cup up on a shelf. A plane went up in the air. You see, I need to give specific examples to teach that up concept. My mind automatically sorts things into categories. It's bottom-up thinking. And you know what? It's the same way computers think. Artificial intelligence thinks exactly the same way. High-end skilled trades not going to get replaced by computers. I was just up in Canada and some big fancy condo lost its water supply. That's not very fun. And it's going to take skilled trades to keep those things going. We also need our visual thinkers to evaluate safety systems. Fukushima was a visual thinking mistake. It's not a good idea when you live next to the sea to put your super important emergency cooling pump in a non-waterproof basement. Well, I can see the water going in there. And what I've learned about the mathematical mind is they don't see it. They calculate the risk. I see it. But on the other hand, I can see solutions. Like we're talking about a job for somebody. Well, I talk to the person, find out, and then all of a sudden, boom, I see the perfect job for them. Now, in order to be able to do that, I have to know what a lot of factories and a lot of stuff looks like, or I wouldn't be able to do that. So you got to fill the database. And I think my thinking got better at age 50 than it was at age 30. So we got to get these kids out doing a lot of stuff, fill up the database. Everything's learned by specific example. Bottom-up thinking. Animals, people with autism, and computers. I've been following stuff on artificial intelligence, really interesting. Now this just shows a flight zone of some sheep that aren't totally tame. See how they're circling around the person, sort of like a force field? And when you enter the flight zone, they move away. But notice how the tan animal's looking at me. So there's 2 zones kind of around animals that aren't completely tame. The flight zone when they move away, but then a pressure zone or zone of awareness where they look at you. And then you got the cattle far away that aren't paying any attention to me at all. Now here's a handy-dandy way to get animals to go forward in the squeeze chute. Quickly walk back by them in the opposite direction. So if they're lined up going this way, you step forward and you just quickly walk back by them like this. It works. Try it. If you've got cattle, try it. It really does work. But you've got to do it kind of briskly. These diagrams are free on my website, Grandin.com is my last name. They're also in my cattle book, which is out there. And when I was younger, I was really weird. So the way I sold my work was showing off a portfolio of my work. Showing my work. 30-second wow. And I started out my business one little project at a time. Gradually build it up, and I wrote about it. One of the things that was really important for my business was learning how to write decently. And then I'd show off my drawings. That's the drawing right there that I sold to Cargill. When I sold Cargill, I'm designing all the front ends. I sent that brochure, I sent that drawing, and then I sent them a bunch of pictures like this, just showing the work off. And then that's a really nice non-slip floor right there. All right, raise your hand if you saw that that animal was looking at the sunbeam. Good. Ooh, we're doing well in this group. They're doing a lot better than the mathematicians at Fermilab did. Yeah, we need to have our visual thinkers to see things like, okay, the Boeing airplane mess. They forgot to tell the pilots that this new computer changed the up-down controls on the plane. All right, see how basic that is? That's totally baby basics. And what I'm realizing about this is not stupidity, it's not cover-up. It's simply not seeing it. And I'm beginning to realize more and more. They just didn't see the pilot pulling back on the yoke. Yeah, I saw it on the flight recorder. You can look it up online. It's hideous. 26 times he pulled it back. They're going to do a software change on that plane. I've been following it very closely. And well, they simply didn't tell the pilots that this new plane had to have a more robust anti-stall system. What does anti-stall system spell? Anti-stall system? Maybe the marketing department didn't want the plane called the MAX ASS. So one of the upgrades they're going to do is have a big sign show up in the cockpit that they're flying, and I don't think it's going to say MAX ASS, but maybe that's what it should say, so they know who they're dealing with when they're flying this plane. Except marketing isn't going to like that. I think it's kind of cool. It's probably the best thing you do for air safety, because they're going to remember that. Okay, some of the work that I've done that probably did some of the biggest improvements in animal handling was measuring it. You know, the beef quality assurance measurement system, you measure prod score, falling down, vocalization score, stumbling. I actually designed that system. Because when you measure something, then you manage it. It's just like speeding out on the highway. If you didn't measure it, imagine what the highway would be like. Now, this is data collected at big feed yards in Nebraska, Kansas, and Colorado. And these are scores to be proud of, because the prod score used to be 500%, not 5%. Now, there was a study done in California about 3 years ago, and the scores were not as good as this. And what showed up on the California ranches is that some people were doing a really good job, and some people were doing not a very good job, and they were prodding all the cattle and not doing that great a job. But these actually are some numbers you can be proud of. This stuff's all on my website on Grandin.com. Ruth's papers on open access. You can look this stuff up. But you measure your handling, and then you can tell, am I getting better or am I getting worse? In 1996, I did baseline data for the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Only 30% of the plants could stun 95% of the cattle correctly on the first shot because the stunner was broken. That's management. And when I first started my career, I thought I could build self-managing cattle handling systems. What? That's nonsense. But a lot of engineering people make that mistake. They think they can fix it all with engineering. You can only fix half the problems with engineering. The other half's management. And then in 1999, I got the power of the Golden Arches behind me. Boy, what a difference. And the thing I'm really proud of is out of 75 plants on the approved supplier list, only 3 had to do something expensive. And 3 had to have a manager-ectomy. Yeah, because nothing was going to change until we got rid of the plant manager. But most of the places we fixed with simple fixes, non-slip flooring. We had to do a lot of non-slip flooring. Things with lighting, which I talked about, training, and moving smaller groups of animals. Now, this is some of our original temperament data that we did 20 years ago. This was radical stuff 20 years ago. Cattle that threw a big fit in a squeeze chute gained less weight. Just that simple. And on the other hand, don't overselect for temperament. You overselect for any trait, you will wreck your animal. Cattle today are a whole lot calmer than they were 20 years ago. But you wouldn't want to get them so calm that maybe she wouldn't graze or she wouldn't take care of her calf. We got to start looking at what is optimal. You know, some moms take good care of their calves, some moms walk away and leave it. You don't want her. And then there's some animals, the Brahmins, if you treat them right, they're very affectionate. They love to be stroked. Now, here are some critical control points for animal welfare at a ranch. Handling scoring, already talked about that. We can look at things like joints, some of the problems that dairies have had with lameness and bad joints, we're now starting to see in beef. And some of this is genetic. When you just select for meat, you're going to lose the ability to climb up those hills. You've either got hills here or you've got rough country. So you're less likely to get in trouble with this stuff than people in Nebraska or someplace where it's flat and it's much better pasture. Because if you just breed just for meat, then you tend to have leg conformation issues, and we'll also have a high altitude sickness coming down to lower and lower levels. That's not a problem here, that's congestive heart failure. So the Angus Association now has got EPDs for leg conformation and for the high altitude disease. But these are things that you'd be measuring for basic animal welfare. And we're getting some pretty hideous knee joints now in some of these cattle. And I think there's a genetic component to this, and too much hot feed's another component. Now, lameness is a really good thing to measure, because look at all the different things here that can make them lame. That's why lameness is a good critical control point. If I'm going out to do a welfare audit, I'm not measuring just this stuff, I'm going to measure lameness. And I've got a book out there called Improving Animal Welfare Practical Approach. It's aimed at people that have to implement an animal welfare program. Rotten feet and legs. The pig industry made this mistake in the late 80s. Bred just for meat, and they got these post legs, they got these collapsed ankles, they got pigs that couldn't walk. And there's some Angus cattle with some of these problems. We got to breed decent feet and legs. Well, that's a show animal right there. I mean, the show industry's always been kind of messed up. I don't think he'd be able to walk up your hills very well. And there's a pig with a hideous foot. And I don't want to see that on cattle, that's for sure. There are a few. And that's crooked claw, that's a defect. The calf will be normal, then as they get older, the toes cross. That's a defect, don't breed that. All right, I just want to finish up before we do some questions and look at how traits are linked. And even with all the genomics that we're doing now, all this fancy genetic stuff we're doing, we still don't understand what I'm going to be showing you. Years ago, like 50 years ago, 60 years ago, a scientist named Belyaev wanted to breed a fur fox that wouldn't tear your hand off. Now you see how lean and snarly he is? 20 years of selection for being nice, and you get a black and white, stocky border collie fox. All right, that's what he looked, that's before. 20 generations, all he did is select for a nice temperament, lick your hand and not tear it off, and you get stocky. Why did the coat color change? Why is the body shape changed? It's not really known, but traits are linked. And deer, that's a picture I took 2 years ago at a New Zealand deer farm. You couldn't get inside the pens like this with deer 30 years ago. They were a lot wilder. And we had a really crazy animal that we bred at our experiment station. And I call this animal the time machine, because this animal is completely crazy compared to the other cattle. Never use that semen ever again, ever. It was genetic. It was kind of a throwback to what they used to be like. All right, bulldog, I got to finish up, got to trash the bulldog. That's what they used to look like. How'd you get to that? Deformed monstrosity? Deformed freakazoid? That's a 1938 version of the bulldog. Now the verbal breed standard says massive head. Like, where do you stop? They got to have a cesarean, they can't breathe. I just talked to a veterinarian today that the skull plates didn't close on this dog, all kinds of crap wrong with it, where it's just birth defects. We shouldn't be breeding these kind of problems. This is an example of bad becoming normal. We don't necessarily have to go back to this one, the 1938. Type Bulldog's Dilemma into Google Images. You can find this picture. Now, if they'd use this as the breed standard, use this picture, rather than the verbal breed standard, we probably have something more like that. And I think that's the most hideous thing. Extreme Arabian horse. Type extreme Arabian horse into Google Images and get ready to throw up. How anybody can think that is beautiful is beyond me. It's not going to be able to breathe. They started breeding for the extreme dish face. That's not okay. What are some of the things we got to do in looking at assessing animal welfare? We got to prevent suffering. We got to remember, no matter where you go, you can't escape this. And they'll photograph anything you do bad, so just don't do it. And the first thing you got to do is prevent suffering. Then we got to work on some of the scoring things. That's going to prevent suffering. There's going to be more and more interest in, are your animals actually having a good time? I think beef cows have a good life. Pigs, they got to worry about some of their housing stuff. But beef's the lucky one. They get to run around out in these hills, breed some good legs so they can go up and down the hills. And there are my books. And what we're going to do right now, I'm going to sell some books afterwards, so right now we're going to do some questions. Always like to do questions. Okay, right there.
Handicapped duck lines, although we don't shoot handicapped ducks. We're handicapped. Their dog is a pure bit, but when you miss, he comes over and scolds. And he misses shooting a duck. He gets so mad, he will go into a seizure.
Was going to a seizure. Well, there's a point where you can, the question was a duck retrieving dog or something, or going into a seizure. Years ago, there were experiments done with what was called nervous pointers. They were breeding the pointer, you know how they point? They'll put their leg up like this and point. Well, they were breeding them to point and breeding them to point till they got a weird defect. They'd get frozen in point, and you could actually tip the dog over. It went catatonic. See, that's an example of breeding too much. You overselect for a behavior trait, you're going to end up with epilepsy. I have talked to people that have been breeding guide dogs for the blind or seeing eye dogs. I talked to one lady, she was in the upper Midwest. She had to retire 2 golden labs at 4 because they got seizures. That's a defect. And they select these dogs to be super calm. I also talked to somebody that got a dog that was dumb as a post and they couldn't train it. And then other people, they were breeding German Shepherds for some guard dog stuff. And they got a weird aggression that came on like a switch. You over-select for a behavior trait, you'll end up with epilepsy. You'll end up with something bad going on. See, we've got to take a lot more balanced view of things. We have to look at what is optimal, not maximum. That's the thing that you've got to do, or you can have some really weird stuff going on. Okay?
Hello. Thank you so much for speaking. It's a pleasure. I think I told you when I met you briefly that my husband and I are Dalmatian owners, and they have a tendency to be a little on the sketchy side. So
yeah, especially some of the ones where you've bred all the melanin out of the central nervous system.
Oh, is that it? That might be it?
That's
quite possible. So after a long hiatus, I'm going to go back to work, and I was wondering if music therapy, some new age spiritual music, what can I... She's a single dog because the
problem with the dog doesn't like being home alone? First of all, when we're trying to figure out something with behavior, I'm a visual thinker, so I have to make a picture in my mind what this dog is doing. And I find that people overgeneralize in trying to deal with an autistic kid's problems or a dyslexic kid's problems, with a dog behavior problem or a horse behavior problem. The first thing I got to do is I got to find out exactly what the dog is doing. Because people will say things like, my dog is crazy. Well, is he crazy little happy fluffy thing jumping on people or something big and nasty tearing a guy's face off? Maybe both of those are crazy. See, so what is the problem with the dog? What is it
when we get home, it's as if we have been gone for 350 years.
So he doesn't handle being home alone.
And then
She does.
she pretty much licks the skin off his face.
Yeah.
When he gets home.
Well, maybe he needs to go to doggy daycare or go to somebody next door that's home during the day. Some dogs, they don't handle being home alone very well. And I think there's genetic differences. That's the separation anxiety trait, and it's a genetically inheritable trait. And some dogs just don't handle it, and he needs to be put over at the next door neighbors or taken to decent doggy daycare.
She was adopted, so she was not very well socialized with other animals,
Well, let me
nor
tell you,
other people.
animals reared by themselves that don't learn when they're little and when they're adolescents how to interact with other animals will be vicious, nasty fighters with other animals. I've seen it in horses, I've seen it in dogs, and I've seen it in cattle. It's nasty. Young animals need to learn the give and take of social relationships with other animals, and adolescent animals need to learn this. Dogs also need to learn that toddlers are people, so you don't get into a dangerous thing with prey drive.
She's 8 years old. Do you think there's any help for her?
With fighting other animals?
Yeah. Well, she just growls, but
Well, maybe the thing to do is, does she like any other people?
not really.
Did you try a thunder shirt?
No, but I'm sure there's a sale on at Old Navy. Maybe I could get her something cute.
And there's no way you could take her to work.
Pardon me?
Then, I mean, the more places are letting you take your dog to work.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Well, thank you so much, Sam.
All right here.
Thank you. Along the same lines, we just got married and moved in together, and I brought 3 cats into his apartment with his 1 cat.
So you got cats don't like each other.
We have 2 girls
Okay.
and 2 boys, and his boy cat gets along with my
One
girls.
thing to do when you introduce cats, you don't ever want to let it get into a knockout, drag-out fight. Let's not
tried
have that
that.
happen. The other thing you might try doing is take the nastiest cat and put it in a carrier.
Okay.
The bully, the nasty, goes in the carrier, and then have the other cats outside. Don't lock the meek cat in the carrier, because then the bully's going to be all over the top of the carrier.
Yeah, we can't tell who the bully is half the time.
So you can't get them to not fight?
The boys hate each other. His boy cat gets along with my girl cats, but doesn't get along with my other boy cat. Everybody's fixed, but we can't figure it out. And sometimes they'll be fine. We've been using. What's your take on CBD oil for animals?
Well, CBD oil works for epilepsy. It's known for that.
Yeah.
It's actually a very good epilepsy drug, and that does have evidence-based.
Yeah.
Calming down the nervous system. But in my book, Animals Make Us Human, I talked to a cat behaviorist about this whole thing, introducing cats. And one of the things she said is we don't want these knockdown, drag-out fights.
We get that.
And that she recommended putting the nastiest one in the carrier.
Okay.
And then the weaker cats are around the carrier.
How long should we leave him in the carrier?
Well, that might take some judgment.
Okay.
Well, you leave it in the carrier when they're together.
Okay.
I'm not saying the cat's going to live in a carrier, but
I couldn't do that.
But you'd
And
put them in there maybe for a couple of hours a day.
Okay, good. I'm actually home all day, so that's something
But it's
we'll try.
important that you put the bully in the carrier.
All right, we just have to figure out who the bully is.
Who the nasty attacker, the one that attacks, goes in the carrier.
Because we have one who's,
And then sometimes they can develop a truce, because we had 2 cats, and they ended up with one stayed upstairs and one stayed downstairs, and it was
we
a
have one who's
truce.
very-
They never liked each other, but
we have Dorian, who just kind of wants to, I don't know if he wants to be friends or if he wants to pick at Sweeney, and then we have Sweeney, who...
well, our cats never became friends. They just had a treaty.
Yeah,
that
that's what we're
avoid
looking
each
for. We're
other.
just looking for a treaty.
And we didn't have to keep them physically locked up separate.
And it's getting to the point where sometimes Sweeney will like poop on the counters in the middle of the night. So we want to avoid that.
Well,
so
now our cats learn to stay away from each other in the middle of the night.
We will try
Yeah.
the carrier thing. I think we're going to try
Yeah, that might
Dorian
help.
first.
Okay, right here?
Thank you.
Where are they at with, when you talk about genetically altering, how many times can they do a breeding? Have they figured this out before they get a real adverse where they say 5 and that's it?
What do you mean? I don't understand what you're
Well-
asking.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to say. So they're breeding something that they want.
Well, the problem is, okay, let's take the big head on the bulldog. All right, let's just go back to this This picture here, we'll put this up there. That's my book on animal welfare, and I got a genetics book out there too. All right, let's go back to, all right, we go to that picture right there. Okay, see, and then a breed standard comes out and says massive head, and then you end up with that. You see, it's a verbal breed standard. I've looked it up. And people don't know where to stop. So you go from this very extreme. That's what the bulldog was originally. See, that happened over a period of years. I call this bad becoming normal. And people just keep breeding it until they really get into trouble. And there's a point where the dog's not functional. And the problem is, it creeps up on you slowly. And then young people come into the field and they think it's normal that they got breathing problems. One advantage of having been around for 44 years is I got some memory of things in the past. You know, there's some death loss problems in cattle right now that we never had in the 70s and 80s. It didn't exist. When I was going out to the Swift plant on my own self-made internship in the 70s, fat cattle coming into the plant, 0 death loss. Yep, they're heavier, they're younger. There's a point where you push the biology, and then you use an engineering term, you overload it, and it starts to fail.
So regarding...
You know, how do we get from that right there to that?
Well, they're using...
See, when I show them beside each other, I show this to students, they're kind of a little bit shocked.
Okay.
See, if the breed standard had been a picture, let's say your breed standard had been this picture, it wouldn't have changed the same way as it did when there was a verbal breed standard. And I've looked it up, recently. It says massive head, it's the exact words. Well, maybe that was a massive head in 1938. You know, and you just keep over-select for trait. And they're beginning to realize now in cattle breeding that they're got to put these other EPDs in for leg conformation and for high altitude sickness. That you can't just blindly select. I listened to one of our top breeders give a talk just this January, and he's singing a different tune now than he did 5 years ago. 5 years ago, it was just production, production, production. And now they're realizing all the lameness and the high altitude sickness, and feed yard cattle just keel over and croak. Yeah, you're going to have to take a much more holistic way of looking at the breeding. Turkey breeders are doing the same thing. And this is where they can use all the genomics data to do this. Okay, right there.
I just had a quick question, little backtracking. So I work with autistic children on the more mod severe. And my question to you is a person...
You're working with which age of kids?
I'm kindergarten through 2nd grade.
Little kids, okay,
Yes,
little kids.
my little babies. So my question to you is, we do like a lot of pressure, like squeezing hands.
Some kids
and
respond to deep pressure and others don't.
Yes.
Sensory issues in autism are extremely variable. So pressure only works on the kids that like pressure.
So my question to you is, what is it about the pressure that is so amazing?
Well, it's just calming. Deep pressure over wide parts of the body are calming. And then some dogs are calmed down by the thundershirt. Other kids, it doesn't work. Sensory issues are extremely variable. You can have sound sensitivity, you can have visual sensitivity problems, where the kid will, when he goes to read, sees the print jiggle on the page. And you may be able to fix that with colored paper. It's very variable. So one kid's going to respond really well to pressure and another one's not going to.
Oh, for sure, and that goes with everything. Even, with us typically developed people, we're not all the same. There's
Typically
no such-
developing people look at like massages. That's, at the airport they have these massage places, and I'm finding out a lot of people have the occupation of massage therapist. That involves deep pressure.
Which is amazing, and I fell asleep on accident.
Yeah, okay.
Woke
All
up
right.
drooling and everything. Oops. That
All
was
right,
my
man, we
first
better
time.
get another question right here.
My question is, do you know of any research going into autism. My son is 17 and nonverbal.
He's
and
nonverbal,
we've tried
okay.
many years speech therapy and many different
Well,
therapies.
and then let's just start looking at what he can do. Can he do all his basic skills? Dressing, showering, all of that stuff?
Yes, no,
Good.
everything.
All right.
He's
Well,
he
one of the things
communicates-
that's important for people, I think this is where a job of some kind where you have meaning in life. And one of the doctors that gives presentations at some autism meetings took a guy out of an institution who was nonverbal, taught him how to make coffee, and he got meaning in life by making really good coffee at a local gas station. And it took a while to train him to do this. And then when he finally retired, he made coffee at the nursing home. But you see, that's giving some meaning at life. He made coffee that people appreciated, and he cleaned the coffee pots so they weren't gross. And people really appreciate that. So we got to start looking at what he can do. And
He's very good at face expression and us knowing what he is needing.
now, has he ever tried to type? Some people that are nonverbal can actually just learn how to type on a tablet.
Yeah, we've tried that too, and he is very independent in many ways. My concern just about speech, just basic.
He may not
words.
ever talk, but he can communicate other ways. Maybe he can
Yeah.
type. And the other thing is, let's start thinking about a job for him, a job that's a useful work that other people want and appreciate. I'm a big believer in seeing what we can do. And talking, maybe he's not going to do talking.
I agree.
But there's
Okay.
other things that he can do.
Definitely.
And there's some of the ones that are nonverbal that can learn how to type. There's some really good books to get written by people that are nonverbal.
Okay.
And one is Tito Mukapadahe, How Can I Talk If My Lips Don't Move? Carly's Voice, and then The Reason I Jump. That made us a New York Times bestseller. The sequel's actually a better book for teachers because he was grown up and he explains things better. I'd actually get the sequel to The Reason I Jump, and it has a weird title like Fall Down 5 Times, Get Up 9 Times. And if you put The Reason I Jump into Amazon, you can find the sequel. I actually would buy the sequel. But those 3 books, written by people that are nonverbal, they describe not being able to control their bodies. They describe sensory jumbling, especially in vision. And if you're working with an older nonverbals, these books are must-reads, absolute must-reads.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right, how about right here? Yeah.
So I was curious, given how much you talk about breeding and you talk about issues of autism, are you ever concerned about how genetic screening is growing increasingly more able to pick up on certain things?
It'll be very, very hard to pull the autism out. It is many, many, many genes are involved that they call a polygenic trait. It's not a simple genetics. And you're going to take the big brain out along with it. No, you're not. It's embedded in the genetics that gives human beings a large brain. You might want to look at this paper. It's called Genomic Trade-Offs. Are autism and schizophrenia the steep price for a human brain? And I'm sure it's going to have citations now. And you're probably going to want to look at its citations. The genetic tests are not simple. I've had my whole coding DNA has been scanned. And yes, I found out I have a blood disorder, and that if I have hip surgery, they got to use 1/4 the dose of warfarin or I could die. I found that out. I found out that if I'd had tooth implants or my horrid teeth, my jaw could have busted apart. So a whole bunch of stuff like that showed up. But the autism, they just list a pile of genes, and it's too embedded. Where some of my other physical problems just popped right out. I'm glad they know about the bleeding thing. Real glad they know about that. And that's a rare variant, and it's good to know about it. Okay, right here.
This is more of a comment for the mother or parent who was talking about their autistic student being nonverbal. I work with deaf and hard of hearing, but we also have Deaf Plus. I had a student this year had no verbal communication, but we started signing.
Okay.
Within 2 years, he can sign.
Well, then maybe try signing. Go
Sign.
ahead and try it.
That's what I would suggest.
Go ahead and try it. Some of them might pick it up and some might not. You just don't know. You don't know. Yeah, go ahead and try it. Yeah, go ahead and try it. Just try it. You know, I'm in favor of trying a lot of different things. But I'm also think that, you know, I find that for me, I always get asked, I mean, autism is an important part of who I am, but my career comes first. And if you look at the HBO movie, I had those cattle pins. I actually had cattle pins because making achievements in the cattle industry came first. I don't think it's good when the whole identity is tied up with autism. Too many kids come up to me, all they want to do is talk about their autism. Well, so then you got all the people over in Silicon Valley running Fortune 500 companies and they're on the spectrum. I'd recommend going online, type in video, Bill Gates antitrust depositions. Keywords video, Bill Gates antitrust depositions. They're old and they're blurry. I'll let you make your own decisions. The other thing that it shows is that a person on the spectrum grows. You see, as you fill the database with more and more and more information, they get more flexible. If they just stay at home and do the same thing every day, no, they're going to get more rigid. Okay, we'll take about, okay, right there.
You mentioned psychotropics like Prozac.
Yeah, I take antidepressants, and I wouldn't be here without antidepressants. Because as I got through my 20s, my anxiety and panic attacks worsened, and I've been on a low dose of an old-fashioned antidepressant since 1980. They saved me.
So how do you feel versus with animals or people, where is the line, or I guess, between environmental management and psychotropics, and where do they mix?
Well, my anxiety got so bad that you know, the squeeze machine finally got to like spitting on a blast furnace. That's not going to work. I was having uncontrollable colitis. That's why I was eating yogurt and Jell-O. I'd eat that for a week, and then I'd try to wean myself off of it. I would have had all my innards like fall out. And when I went on the low dose of the antidepressant, it stopped the anxiety. The mistake made with antidepressants is too high a dose. Then you get agitation and insomnia. I'd recommend you read my book, Thinking in Pictures, and read my chapter in there, and then make your own decisions. But there's a place for careful, conservative use of medication. And I want to emphasize careful, conservative use. The younger the child, the more conservative you need to be, because otherwise it's kind of an uncontrolled experiment on the developing brain. Well, the same thing with dogs. We're having more behavior problems than we ever had because dogs are kept too cooped up, they're not getting socialized, too much home alone, they're not getting enough exercise, and also there's people out there breeding some bad behavior in the dogs too, which is really bad. And we didn't have that problem in the past either. Let's do 2 more questions and then, because we got to drive to LA tonight, so, okay. Okay, first of all, how old is he? He's 17. See, this is where, if it's a little kid at 3, I can give you a standard answer on early intervention. But I have to have some information. He's 17. All right, I don't care what he had when he was born. What has he got now? How well can he read? Well, some of that is just the panic attacks. Ooh, that's bad. Well, no, there's certain things you don't take to school. Now, some things have gone overboard. I read about the kid who chewed a Pop-Tart into the shape of a gun, and a Pop-Tart. A pastry, in case you don't know what that is. It's a piece of pastry. Yeah. You know, so that's like overboard the other way. But the thing is, you got to learn that there's certain things that you don't do. Well, the thing I would want to think of now is he's 17. Has he ever had a job? No, he's never. He needs to get a job. Let's figure out how we can get him to get a job and keep one. All right, first of all, how well can he read? He can read pretty good. All right, what's pretty good? Can he read USA Today I'm going to look at it strictly from the standpoint of an employer. Maybe I'm going to put him to work on a construction site. I've got to have somebody who can read at the 6th or 7th grade level. You can run a Fortune 500 company at the 6th or 7th grade level of reading and writing, but you do have to have that. Can you do that?
Yeah, he's like a mathematician, he's into like algorithms.
Well, if he's ever been taught any programming, maybe he needs to go work for Google. Anybody given him a programming book?
No.
Well, maybe someone ought to give him a book on JavaScript and Python. They're available on Amazon. They're not very expensive. Because you can't learn programming if you're not exposed. Well, this is the problem. The thing that I was not allowed to do was become a recluse in my room. No, this is the mistake, and this is where you might need a little bit of medication, a little antidepressant, a little Prozac or something, and then we got to get them out.
They put him on medication before, but one of the medications they gave for ADHD, he has that and the autism, they misdiagnosed him, the medication caused him to have violent seizures. So they had
Well, that's like stupid. I don't know. Some of the stuff that's going on is pretty incompetent, but there's a place for careful conservative use of medication. I've got it in my Way I See It book. Also, Future Horizons has got a very nice book written by an older pediatrician, Conservative Careful Use of Medication. But anxiety, what you use is antidepressants in low doses, maybe half the starter dose. Because if you raise it too much, you get agitation and insomnia. There's a dose window. You exceed it, you're in a pile of trouble. But I worked with 3 other visual thinking designers. They're all on low-dose Prozac. Otherwise, they'd be in the gutter on drugs and alcohol. You see, drugs used carefully, drugs saved me. I can't be anti-drug, but we've got to be really careful and conservative with it and watch carefully what it does. And there's way too much stuff given out like candy. There's way too much stuff just thrown at it without any thought going into it. But used right, drugs saved me. I take 1 med, and that's the reason why I have to drink so much water. That is a side effect of the drug. I can live with that. Okay, 1 more question. Okay, 5 minutes left. Okay, all right, we can still do a couple of more quick questions. Okay, you have a question? Okay.
For me, it's more of a personal thing. I was diagnosed with autism after 18, and one of the things I saw on one of the slides was difficulty with algebra. When I was tested, I excelled in science and other subjects.
Good.
But I tested low in mathematics, and I always avoided mathematics because I couldn't comprehend it. And I'm trying to.
All right, what can you do now? I want to figure out what to do with you now. You look really grown up.
Right now.
And I want to get you in the workforce. What are you good at?
Right now, I'm going into engineering because I want to become a biomedical engineer, so I could.
Well, I can tell you how to get in the back door if you have to. Okay, what if I couldn't graduate from high school because I couldn't do algebra? And I ran into a kid in the southeast that had this problem. I'd head for the Amazon warehouse. You want to find out how that works inside? You just go on to YouTube and look up automated warehouse. You'll find out how it works. Somebody has to fix that stuff. So what you do is you get a job in there. But you're going to have to pay your dues. And you're going to have to work every job in there. And then when something breaks, you save them. You know what? You'll be designing the next warehouse. That's an example of going in the back door. And I know quite a few people that have done that. And there's certain places that can be a door. And you want the automated warehouse, not the stupid one with the forklifts. You want not the old-fashioned warehouse. Don't go there. And meat industry, I've seen this. I've seen people come into the meat industry, learn every job on the floor, become a foreman, then they run the whole floor. There's a lady that I'm pretty sure was on the spectrum. She's about 10 years younger than me. They gave her the worst job on the beef slaughter floor, the worst job. Pick these slimy, gross beef heads up and hang them on the line, 35-pound beef heads. They wanted to run her off. She did it. She ended up managing the entire floor, 200 employees. That's the kind, and this is, you see, this is specific, and I'm pretty sure she's on the spectrum, undiagnosed. I don't know if I could have done that job. It's such a hard job to do physically. But that's going in the back door. Biomedical engineering, just get a job in a lab. And you might end up designing and stuff. You see, we need visual thinkers in design. A lot of visual thinkers can't do math. But we need visual thinkers. Let's look at the iPhone. Steve Jobs was an artist. The engineers had to make that phone work. He came up with the interface. Okay, the stupid mistake that Boeing made, I shouldn't really call it stupid. I honestly and truly don't think they see it, because the mathematician tried to calculate what's the probability that this computerized system would be activated when it should not be. Somebody has to ask the very simple question. If there's 2 sensors on the plane for measuring the angle that it flies, the computer's only wired to one of them. So what happens when it breaks at a low altitude and it's automatically shoving the nose down? Yeah, somebody has to ask. It's a question that basic, but you see, it's visual thinking. We need our visual thinkers. Visual thinking is part of, doing design and engineering. See, and you just take the grade A math bookworm. There isn't going to be anybody that asks some of the basic questions that need to be asked. You can look up Lion Air flight data recorder. It looks like a heart rate monitor, 2 lines. Computer shoving the nose down, pilot pulling back on the yoke, losing altitude. It's simple to read. It's all nicely labeled. You see, and then I'm seeing what went on. How could you make that mistake? It's a really nice airplane. It gets 10 to 12% more fuel efficient, but it stalls more easily. Okay, basic airplane. You throw your toy airplane. It goes like this, and it stalls. And then it gains airspeed. That works fine at high altitude. It doesn't work real well at takeoff. Yeah. There's some things to learn that toy airplanes can teach you. So you really do need all the different kinds of minds. But there are back doors. Every time I pass some big fancy warehouses, I go their back door. There's a jillion conveyors in there you got to fix. Those Kiva robots have little wheels on them. They all have to be fixed. They're hiring. But you have to work your butt off first. You got to pay your dues in these places. Same thing on the meat processing line. I've watched people become plant manager. And they learn every job on the floor. There is a back door. Reading and writing at the 6th to 7th grade level is essential. Because you can't read the manuals. You can't read, this stuff you're going to have to be able to read at that level. All right, one more question. Okay, right over here. Biggest obstacle? Getting bullied and teased in high school. Absolutely the worst. I was thrown out of a large high school at 14 for throwing a book at a girl. A big high school didn't work for me. And I ended up going to a special boarding school for kids with problems that had a farm. And there's some kids where they're pulling them out of high school and they're homeschooled. They need to be getting jobs. And I might even put them in the underground economy just to get them working. See, one of the things I've learned from working in construction, I've been 25 years in construction. I'd sell a job, do the drawings, supervise the construction, then I'd start that job up. Construction has an urgency. You don't have parts, you get them. There's an urgency that I'm seeing lots of times. Too many parents, when I suggest their kid get a job, they go, we're thinking about it. So we don't think about it in construction. There's a point where you got to order the steel. You got to start doing it. You don't have parts? We didn't have the internet when I was in construction. You picked that phone up and you called until you found them. Because that's what you had to do. That's, and you got to get it done. But, so what do you do if you're, low-income family? I want to get that kid, as soon as he's legal, I want to get him in the legal workforce. They're not sitting at home. That I'm not letting them do. Because one of the biggest problems with these kids, they isolate themselves. There's 2 paths I'm seeing the fully verbal kids go. Learn how to work, get out and get married, maybe have a family, go work for Boeing, or end up in the basement playing video games. Because not enough's being done to get them out doing things. Okay, I think we're going to end it there, and thank you all for coming.